My name is Margaret Maggie Reynolds, and I'm a 65-year-old retired nurse from Texas. After 43 years of saving lives at Mercy General Hospital, I thought my retirement party would be perfect. Boy, was I wrong. The hospital cafeteria had been transformed with balloons and streamers. My coworkers had gone all out. There were photos of me from my first day as a young nurse in 1981, right up to last week. Susan Martinez, my best friend and fellow nurse, had organized everything. She'd even gotten my favorite chocolate cake from Randall's grocery store. "Maggie, you deserve this celebration," Susan whispered as we watched people arrive. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, and administrators filled the room. Even Dr. Collins, the chief of surgery, had shown up. That meant everything to me. My heart swelled with pride. These people respected me. They valued my work. I delivered babies, comforted dying patients, and worked double shifts during the worst flu outbreaks. This was my moment to shine. But then my son Garrett walked in with his wife Carol. Something felt off immediately. Garrett looked uncomfortable in his expensive suit. At 38, he'd become everything I never wanted him to be. Arrogant. Entitled. Cold. His wife Carol clutched her designer purse like someone might steal it. They lived in Highland Park, the fancy part of Dallas, and never let anyone forget it. "Mom," Garrett said, giving me a stiff hug. "Nice party." "Very modest." Carol barely acknowledged me. She was too busy checking her phone and looking bored. They'd driven their BMW here, probably worried about parking it in the hospital lot. God forbid someone scratched their precious car. "I'm so glad you came," I told them, trying to keep the peace. "It means the world to me." Garrett's eyes scanned the cafeteria. I could see him judging everything. The plastic chairs. The paper plates. The homemade decorations. This wasn't fancy enough for his tastes. Nothing ever was anymore. "Where's little Michael?" I asked about my grandson. "At home with the nanny," Carol said without looking up from her phone. "We couldn't bring him to this." My heart sank. Michael was only 8 years old. My only grandchild. I barely got to see him anymore. The party continued around us, but I felt the joy draining away. Dr. Collins tapped his glass with a plastic spoon. The room quieted down as everyone gathered around. My stomach fluttered with excitement. This was really happening. After all these years, I was finally getting the recognition I deserved. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Collins began, "we're here to celebrate someone very special. Margaret Reynolds has been the backbone of this hospital for over 4 decades. People clapped and cheered. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Susan squeezed my hand supportively. "Maggie has delivered over 3,000 babies," Dr. Collins continued. "She's worked Christmas mornings, New Year's Eves, and every holiday in between. She's trained countless new nurses and saved more lives than we can count." The applause grew louder. I looked around the room at all these faces I'd worked alongside for years. These people knew my worth. They understood what I'd sacrificed for this job. "She's been a mother figure to all of us," said Jenny Patterson, a young nurse I'd mentored. "When I was scared during my first code blue, Maggie talked me through it. She taught me that nursing isn't just a job. It's a calling." I wiped away a tear. This was everything I'd hoped for. More people shared their stories about me. How I'd stayed late to comfort a grieving family. How I'd caught a medication error that could have been fatal. How I'd organized collections for coworkers going through tough times. "Maggie represents the best of what nursing can be," Dr. Collins said. "She's compassionate, dedicated, and irreplaceable. We're going to miss her terribly." The room erupted in applause again. I felt so proud, so validated. All those years of hard work were paying off. All those sacrifices meant something. I looked over at Garrett, hoping to see pride in his eyes. Instead, he was checking his expensive watch. Carol was still scrolling through her phone, completely disinterested. They couldn't even pretend to care about this moment that meant everything to me. "Mom, when do you think this will wrap up?" Garrett whispered. "We have dinner reservations at 8. My heart broke a little. This was my retirement party. The culmination of my career. And he was worried about dinner reservations. "Would you like to say a few words, Maggie?" Dr. Collins asked. I stood up on shaky legs. Everyone was looking at me expectantly. This was my moment to shine. I walked to the front of the cafeteria, my hands trembling slightly. All these familiar faces looked back at me with warmth and affection. I'd worked alongside most of them for decades. They were more than coworkers. They were family. Thank you all so much, I began, my voice catching slightly. 43 years ago, I walked into this hospital as a scared 22-year-old. I had no idea what I was doing. People chuckled knowingly. We'd all been there. But you all taught me. You showed me what it meant to care for people at their most vulnerable moments. You taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about compassion, patience, and never giving up hope. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. These were my people. This was my legacy. I've seen births and deaths, miracles and tragedies. I've held crying babies and held the hands of dying patients. Every single day taught me something new about the strength of the human spirit. The room was completely quiet now. Everyone was hanging on my words. Thank you for letting me be part of something bigger than myself. Thank you for 43 years of purpose and meaning. The applause was thunderous. People were wiping their eyes. Even though old Dr. Collins looked emotional. Susan stepped forward with a beautifully wrapped gift. From all of us at Mercy General, she said with a big smile. We wanted you to have something special to remember us by. My hands shook as I unwrapped the package. Inside was a gorgeous crystal clock engraved with my name and years of service. Below that, it read, "In appreciation of your dedicated service and compassionate care." I burst into tears. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever received. All those years of hard work, all those long shifts, all those sacrifices, they meant something. These people saw my value. There's more, Dr. Collins said, pulling out an envelope. The hospital board has decided to name the new pediatric wing after you. The Margaret Reynolds Children's Wing will serve families for generations to come. I couldn't believe it. A wing of the hospital named after me? I'd dreamed of recognition like this my entire career. It felt surreal, like something that happened to other people, not small-town Texas nurses like me. People were clapping and cheering again. Someone started taking pictures. I clutched the crystal clock to my chest, overwhelmed with gratitude and joy. This was perfect. This was everything I'd ever wanted. But then I looked over at my son again. Garrett was standing against the wall, looking impatient and annoyed. He kept checking his phone and whispering to Carol. They looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Why couldn't he just be happy for me? Just this once? This was the biggest honor of my life, and he couldn't even pretend to care. I tried to catch his eye, hoping for a smile or a thumbs up. Something to show he was proud of his mother. Instead, he rolled his eyes when he saw me looking. Carol tugged on his sleeve and pointed to her watch. They were actually counting down the minutes until they could leave. My retirement party was just an inconvenience to them. The hurt started building in my chest. I'd raised Garrett by myself after his father left when he was 6. I'd worked double shifts to pay for his college, his car, his apartment. I'd sacrificed everything for him. And this was how he repaid me? By treating my biggest achievement like a waste of his precious time? Maggie, come take a picture with the night shift crew, Susan called out. I forced a smile and pushed down my disappointment. This was still my day. I wouldn't let Garrett's attitude ruin it. But deep down, I knew something was building. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The party continued around me, but I felt distracted now. People kept coming up to congratulate me, to share memories, to wish me well. I tried to stay present and grateful, but I kept glancing over at Garrett and Carol. They'd moved closer to the exit, clearly preparing to make their escape. Garrett kept looking at his watch like he had somewhere important to be. More important than celebrating his mother's retirement, apparently. Your son looks just like you did at that age, said Betty Walsh, an older nurse who'd been at the hospital even longer than me. He must be so proud. I forced another smile. I hope so. But honestly, I wasn't sure Garrett had ever been proud of me. Not since he'd gotten his business degree and started making big money. Not since he'd married Carol and moved to Highland Park. Not since he decided that regular people like his mother weren't good enough for his new lifestyle. Maggie, we need to start wrapping this up, Susan said quietly. The evening shift is coming on soon. I nodded, understanding. The party had been wonderful, but real life had to continue. The hospital never slept. There were always patients to care for, families to comfort, lives to save. Maybe it was better this way. End on a high note before anything could go wrong. But I should have known better. Before everyone leaves, Dr. Collins called out, I think we should hear from Maggie's family. Garrett, would you like to say a few words about your mother? My heart stopped. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for and dreading at the same time. A chance for my son to finally say something nice about me in front of all my colleagues. Garrett looked surprised and annoyed at being put on the spot. Carol elbowed him and whispered something in his ear. He shook his head, but everyone was looking at him now. There was no graceful way to refuse. Oh, that's not necessary, I said quickly, sensing danger. Garrett doesn't need to. Nonsense, Dr. Collins interrupted. I'm sure he has wonderful things to say about his mother. The room fell quiet as Garrett reluctantly walked to the front. Every eye was on him. This was my son, and everyone expected him to be proud of me, to acknowledge my sacrifices and achievements. I held my breath, hoping against hope that he'd find something nice to say. Maybe he'd talk about how hard I'd worked to raise him, or how I'd always been there for him, or how proud he was of my career. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked around the room with obvious discomfort. Well, he began, and I could already hear the dismissive tone in his voice. I guess I should say something about my mother, Garrett continued, his voice flat and reluctant. The room was completely silent, everyone waiting to hear heartwarming words from a loving son. But I could see it in his eyes. The coldness, the resentment, the embarrassment he felt about having a mother who was just a nurse. Margaret has certainly been dedicated to this place, he said, emphasizing the word like it was something distasteful. Maybe too dedicated, if you ask me. A few people shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the loving tribute they'd expected. I mean, she spent more time here than she ever did at home, Garrett continued, his voice getting sharper. Always working extra shifts, always staying late, always putting strangers before her own family. My face burned with embarrassment. This wasn't what I'd wanted. This wasn't what anyone had expected. People were starting to look uncomfortable, unsure whether this was meant to be funny or critical. Garrett, I said quietly, trying to stop him. That's enough. But he wasn't done. Carol was smirking now, enjoying the show. She'd probably encouraged him to do this. To embarrass me in front of everyone I respected. The truth is, Garrett said, looking directly at me with cold eyes, my mother has never been worth much of anything except changing bedpans and taking orders from doctors. The room went dead silent. I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. Change bedpans and take orders? Is that really how my own son saw my life's work? She's never accomplished anything meaningful, Garrett continued, his voice getting louder and more vicious. Never built anything, never created anything of value. She's just a worker bee who followed instructions for 43 years. I could hear people gasping. Dr. Collins looked horrified. Susan's mouth was hanging open in shock. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. While I was building a real career, making real money, creating actual value in the world, my mother was here playing nurse to people she doesn't even know, Garrett said with disgust. She wasted her entire life taking care of strangers instead of focusing on what actually matters. Tears started streaming down my face. In front of everyone. All my colleagues, my friends, the people who respected me, they were watching my own son destroy me. Garrett, stop, I whispered, but my voice was too weak. Too broken. The truth hurts, doesn't it, Mom? He said with a cruel smile. You think this little party makes you special? You think people actually care about you? You're nothing but a glorified janitor who couldn't even raise her own son properly. The crystal clock slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. The silence in the room was deafening. Nobody knew what to do or say. How do you respond when someone's child destroys them so completely and publicly? I stood there in shock, surrounded by the broken pieces of my retirement gift. The beautiful crystal clock that had meant everything to me just moments ago was now scattered across the cafeteria floor. Just like my dignity. Just like my heart. Dr. Collins was the first to recover. "I think you should leave," he said to Garrett, his voice shaking with anger. "Right now." Garrett shrugged like he didn't care. "We were leaving anyway. Come on, Carol. We've wasted enough time here." They walked out without another word, leaving me standing in the wreckage of what should have been the best day of my life. Carol didn't even look back. Neither did my son. "Maggie," Susan said softly, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there crying in front of everyone I'd worked with for decades. The same people who'd just watched my son call me worthless, meaningless, a failure. Everyone," Dr. Collins announced, "I think we should give Margaret some space." People started filing out quietly, many of them stopping to squeeze my hand or whisper apologies. But what could they say? What could anyone say after witnessing something like that? Within 10 minutes, the cafeteria was empty except for Susan and me. She helped me to a chair and brought me a glass of water. I couldn't stop shaking. "That wasn't about you," Susan said firmly. "That was about him. Something is very wrong with that boy." But her words didn't help. All I could hear was Garrett's voice calling me worthless. Saying I'd wasted my life. Claiming I'd never accomplished anything meaningful. 43 years, I whispered. 43 years of my life, and my own son thinks it was all meaningless. "Your son is an idiot," Susan said bluntly. "And everyone in that room knows it. What you do matters, Maggie. What you've always done matters." But how could I believe that when my own child saw me as nothing more than a glorified janitor? When the person I'd sacrificed everything for thought I was worthless? "Maybe he's right," I said, staring at the broken glass on the floor. Maybe I did waste my life. Maybe I should have focused on making money instead of helping people. Maybe I should have been more ambitious, more selfish, more like him. "Stop that right now," Susan said sharply. "Don't you dare let that spoiled brat make you question everything you are." But it was too late. The damage was done. The seed of doubt was planted. Susan offered to drive me home, but I declined. I needed time alone to process what had just happened. The 20-minute drive from the hospital to my small house in Arlington felt like the longest journey of my life. I kept replaying Garrett's words over and over. Never accomplished anything meaningful. Glorified janitor. Worthless. Is that really how he saw me? The mother who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his college? The woman who'd gone without so he could have everything he wanted? When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in my car for a long time. My little house looked so small and shabby compared to Garrett's mansion in Highland Park. My 10-year-old Honda Civic looked pitiful next to his BMW. Maybe that's all he saw when he looked at me. A failure who never made it out of the working class. A woman who'd settled for small dreams and smaller paychecks. Inside the house, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, surrounded by photos of Garrett throughout the years. His high school graduation. His college graduation. His wedding. His promotion at the investment firm. I'd been so proud of him. So proud that my little boy had made something of himself, had achieved the financial success I'd never managed. But apparently, my pride meant nothing to him. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed replaying every moment of the party, wondering how it had gone so wrong. How my perfect day had turned into the worst humiliation of my life. At 3 a.m, I got up and made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper, trying to make sense of everything. When did things go wrong between Garrett and me? When had he started seeing me as an embarrassment instead of his mother? Maybe it was when he started dating Carol. She'd never liked me, never thought I was good enough for her boyfriend's family. She came from money, from doctors and lawyers and business owners. I was just a nurse from a small town. Or maybe it started even earlier, when Garrett got his business degree and started making more money than I'd ever seen. When he moved out of our modest neighborhood and into his fancy apartment. When he started wearing expensive suits and driving luxury cars. Somewhere along the way, he decided that success meant money and status. And since I had neither, I wasn't successful. I was just his embarrassing, working-class mother who reminded him of where he came from. But you know what? As I sat there in my quiet kitchen at 4 in the morning, something began to shift inside me. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was humiliated. But I was also getting angry. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How dare he? How dare my own son dismiss 43 years of service like it meant nothing? I'd delivered over 3,000 babies. I'd comfort dying patients and their families. I'd trained dozens of new nurses. I'd worked through hurricanes, pandemics, and personal tragedies because people depended on him. Ever done for anyone besides himself? He worked for an investment firm, managing money for rich people so they could get richer. How is that more meaningful than saving lives? By sunrise, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my retirement feeling worthless and ashamed. If Garrett thought his mother was just a simple nurse with no power, no connections, and no value, he was about to learn how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and started making calls. "Susan," I said when she answered. "I need you to get me Carol's parents' phone number. And I need the contact information for everyone who was at the party yesterday." "Maggie? What are you planning?" "I'm planning to show my son exactly how wrong he is about his worthless mother." Susan came over that afternoon with a list of phone numbers and email addresses. She also brought something else, information about Garrett's job at Morrison Financial Group. "I did a little research," she said with a mischievous smile. "Did you know that Morrison Financial has a big contract with the hospital system? They manage the pension fund for all hospital employees." My eyes widened. I hadn't known that. But it explained why Dr. Collins had looked so horrified when Garrett embarrassed me. It wasn't just personal, it was professional. "There's more," Susan continued. "Carol's father, Dr. Richard Pemberton, sits on the hospital board. He's also one of Morrison Financial's biggest private clients." Things were getting more interesting by the minute. "And here's the really good part," Susan said, lowering her voice. "Jenny Patterson's husband works in IT at Morrison Financial. He says there have been rumors about some of the younger advisors taking shortcuts with client accounts." I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Garrett wasn't as untouchable as he thought. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal," I told Susan. "But if there's information out there that people should know." "Already on it," she said with a grin. "Jenny's husband is going to do some digging. Completely above board, of course." For the first time since the party, I felt like myself again. Determined. Focused. Ready to fight back. Over the next few weeks, information started trickling in. Jenny's husband, Tom, discovered that Garrett had been cutting corners with several client accounts. Nothing technically illegal, but certainly unethical and against company policy. He'd been churning accounts to generate extra commission fees. He'd been investing client money in high-risk ventures without proper disclosure. He'd even been skimming small amounts from dormant accounts, thinking no one would notice. Meanwhile, Susan had been talking to people who'd attended the retirement party. Word was spreading quickly through the hospital about what Garrett had done to me. People were outraged. "Dr. Collins wants to talk to you," Susan told me one Thursday morning. "He's been getting calls all week from staff members who are furious about their pension money being managed by your son." This was better than I'd hoped. Garrett had humiliated me in front of the very people whose money he was supposed to be protecting. They weren't likely to forget that anytime soon. But I still needed more. I needed something that would really make him pay for what he'd done to me. That's when Carol's parents called. "Margaret," Dr. Pemberton said when I answered the phone. "We need to talk. Can you come to our house this evening?" The ice in his voice told me everything I needed to know. Garrett was about to learn that actions have consequences. Dr. Richard Pemberton's mansion in Highland Park made Garrett's house look modest. When Carol's parents invited me over, I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. "Margaret, please sit down," Dr. Pemberton said stiffly. His wife, Patricia, looked embarrassed and angry. "We owe you an apology for our daughter-in-law's behavior at your retirement party." I stayed quiet, letting them talk. "We've heard about what Garrett said to you," Patricia added. "It's inexcusable. We raised our daughter better than that." Dr. Pemberton leaned forward. What you may not know is that Morrison Financial manages not just the hospital pension fund, but also our family foundation. After what happened at your party, we've been having serious concerns about Garrett's character and judgment. My heart started racing. This was going even better than I'd hoped. We've also been getting reports about some questionable practices in his client management, he continued. Nothing criminal, but definitely unethical. The kind of behavior that reflects poorly on the entire firm. What are you saying? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. We're pulling our accounts from Morrison Financial, Dr. Pemberton said firmly. All of them. The family foundation, our personal investments, everything. And we're recommending that the hospital board do the same with the pension fund. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was celebrating. This was exactly what Garrett deserved. There's more, Patricia said quietly. We've talked to Carol extensively about what happened. She claims she tried to stop Garrett from saying those things, but we don't believe her. She's just as guilty as he is. Dr. Pemberton nodded grimly. We've asked Carol to move back home. She and Michael will be staying with us while she files for divorce. My jaw dropped. I hadn't expected this. Garrett wasn't just losing clients and money, he was losing his family too. We want Michael to have a relationship with his grandmother, Patricia continued. A real relationship, not the superficial visits Carol has been allowed. You're welcome here anytime, Margaret. Tears started forming in my eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they were happy tears. What will happen to Garrett? I asked. Dr. Pemberton's smile was cold. Morrison Financial has already asked him to resign. Word travels fast in the financial community, especially when it involves insulting the very people whose money you're managing. No other firm in Dallas will touch him. Over the next month, I watched my son's perfect life completely fall apart. Without the Pemberton family's money and influence, he lost not just his job but his entire social circle. The mansion in Highland Park had to be sold to pay debts. The BMW was repossessed. Carol filed for divorce and was awarded full custody of Michael, along with substantial alimony. The prenup Garrett had insisted on worked against him when the court learned about his unethical business practices. But the best part? The absolute best part came 6 weeks after my retirement party. I was having lunch at my favorite diner when Garrett walked in. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes, obviously struggling financially. He saw me and hesitated, clearly embarrassed. Mom, he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from me. Can we talk? I looked at my son, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement had disappeared. For the first time in years, he looked like the little boy I'd raised instead of the cold stranger he'd become. I lost everything, he continued, his voice breaking. My job, my house, my wife, my son. Everyone in Dallas knows what I did to you. No one will hire me. No one will even return my calls. I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee. I was wrong, he said finally. So incredibly wrong. You're not worthless, Mom. You never were. You're the strongest, most dedicated person I know, and I was an idiot to say those things. Yes, I agreed calmly. You were. He flinched at my bluntness, but continued. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for your help. I don't have anyone else left. I studied his face for a long moment. This was my son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. Part of me wanted to help him, to make everything okay like I'd done his whole life. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated in front of everyone I respected, wasn't ready to let him off the hook quite yet. You called me a glorified janitor, I said quietly. You said I'd never accomplished anything meaningful. You said I was worthless. I know. I'm sorry. I was angry and stupid and... You were embarrassed by me, I interrupted. By your mother who worked 3 jobs to put you through college. By the woman who sacrificed everything so you could have a better life than I did. Garrett hung his head in shame. Yes. Well, here's what this worthless, meaningless, glorified janitor is going to do for you, I said, reaching into my purse. I pulled out a newspaper and slid it across the table. The custodial position at Mercy General is open. Night shift, minimum wage, cleaning bedpans and taking orders from people who actually save lives. If you want my help, that's where you'll start. His eyes widened in horror. Mom, I can't. You can and you will, I said firmly. Or you can figure out your problems on your own. Your choice. He stared at the job listing for a long moment, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. I'll do it. I smiled for the first time since the retirement party. Good. And Garrett. Yes. Maybe working alongside all us worthless healthcare workers will teach you what real value looks like. As I walked out of that diner, leaving my son to contemplate his new reality, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Pride. Not pride in my son. He still had a lot of work to do to earn that back. Pride in myself. I'd shown him that actions have consequences. I'd proven that even a simple nurse has more power than he'd ever imagined. And most importantly, I'd taught him that the people he dismissed as worthless were the very people who could destroy his perfect life. Garrett thought he was so much better than his mother. Well, now he could spend his nights cleaning up after the doctors and nurses he used to look down on. And me? I was going to enjoy every minute of my well-deserved retirement, knowing that I'd raised over 3,000 babies, saved countless lives, and finally, taught my son some respect. After all, they don't name hospital wings after worthless people.